Welcome to the Josh Hall Web Design Show. Helping you build better websites and create a web design business that gives you freedom and a lifestyle you love.
Hello, friends. Welcome into podcast episode 160. I'm really excited about this episode because it's a little bit different for the podcast. What we're going to do in this one is a look back. Since we're early in 2022, I wanted to take some time to reflect on some of the top moments of the podcast from last year in 2021 and kind of highlight those in this episode. Now, these are not the top 10 most downloaded episodes. We're not going to actually feature an entire episode here. We're just going to take snippets from thoughts of some of the top 10 episodes that I recall as I got to thinking about the show last year and thinking about some of the amazing guests and interviews I was able to do in 2021. And I do want to say that on the top here. These are not the only 10 moments that stuck with me through the podcast. I had thousands of moments from last year from the podcast, as I hope you did as well, that really impacted you. These are simply the top 10 that kind of stuck out to me when I went back and listened to some episodes and thought about some of the moments that stuck out to me from the podcast last year. So just keep that in mind. And I think this is really important because as web designers and entrepreneurs, if you're like me, you've often got done with a year, you may be playing out the next year, and then you're in go mode, and you don't take some time to just sit back and reflect. And that's what I want to encourage you to do with your business. Just as we're doing right now with the podcast and reflecting on some of the top 10 moments from 2021, I want you to reflect on last year in your business as well. Think about what went well, think about what maybe didn't go so well, think about what you can change, and think about some of the things that you've accomplished, because sometimes we've accomplished a lot in a year, but we just don't think about it and don't reflect and take account for what we actually got done. So that's what we're going to do in this episode. Again, just little snippets from top 10 moments that I personally really they stuck with me as I thought back through 2021 in the podcast. So we're going to start off with number one from episode 130 with Crissy Maier, who, if you didn't listen to that episode, Crissy, first off, is an amazing entrepreneur, an awesome author. She is the author of the children's book, The Too Tall Giraffe, which is about a giraffe with differences. It's too tall, as you might guess. Now, what's interesting about this is that Crissy, this was a really personal episode for me, by the way, because Crissy, much like my first daughter, was born with a cleft lip and palate. And for those of you who didn't hear that episode yet, Crissy went through several surgeries because she had some facial differences that she had to have surgeries on, and it obviously affected her growing up. And she talks openly about her learning and how it was different than a lot of other kids, and she really struggled with comparison and imposter syndrome, which we all as web designers do as well. But Crissy had some amazing thoughts on how to combat imposter syndrome and how to combat comparison. And again, this was personal for me because my oldest daughter, Breedt, also was born with a cleft lip and palate, and she's had surgeries, and we're working with her on how to deal with those differences and the struggles that she may have ahead. So this episode, we're going to start off with just a snippet from this talk from Crissy about how to combat comparison. Check this out.
Well, I think especially in the creative space where everybody is in a different spot, everybody has a different focus. You have to focus on what you're doing and the change that you're making for people. My website, I don't know if, I'm sure there's better ones out there. There's worse ones out there. But it's if you saw what I had before, it's so much better. So when we compare ourselves to ourselves, we see progress. One thing that I do is I keep a daily, weekly, and monthly and annual tracking or journal, whatever you want to call it. And every month at the end of the month, I go through it and write down all of my wins for the month. And at the end of the month, I'll be like, I don't remember what I did and what I accomplished. And when I go through that sheet, I'm like, wow, I did a lot. And so sometimes when you feel like you're spinning your wheels, you're getting nowhere, the website didn't come out right, whatever doesn't feel like it's going right, when you go back and look at all the things that you accomplished in a 30-day period, you'll be amazed. And I think comparison of other people isn't fair to yourself. Comparison to yourself shows you the progress that you're making. And as a web designer, look at websites you made a year ago and look at what you made now. And I bet you'll be like, oh, wow, I'm doing much better.
I just love that. Crissy was so amazing. Highly recommend you listen to the full episode 130 with Crissy Maier, the author of Too Tall Giraffe. Now, number 2 here, my second biggest moment of the podcast that really stuck with me was from one of my awesome colleagues, Wes McDowell. This is going right into to websites, and particularly, what is the difference between social media and websites? Because I'm sure a lot of your clients are wondering this. I mean, maybe it's a little bit different now in 2022, but I always had a lot of clients wonder, why do I need a website if I have a Facebook page or an Instagram profile? Like what, or if it's just a landing page, ClickFunnels style page, like why do I need an actual website? Well, Wes makes a really good point and really differentiates the difference between social media platforms and websites. I want you to take what Wes says right here and put it in your toolbox for the next time that you talk with clients and they ask you the same question. So check this out.
Yeah, well, it's really the difference, I think, between having a marketing department and a sales department. I think of social media as the marketing. It's the driver to get people, it's to get your word out, it's to get people over to your sales team, which is your website. That's where you can really control the conversation in a linear way. Because let's think of social media. Not only are you competing with everything else that's going on there, right? The cat photos, the food photos, the reels, all that kind of stuff. But you're also competing, if you're just looking at your account as doing the job of your website, it's very scattered. There's scattered information in a grid where people just kind of pick and choose a la carte what they want to see versus, right, they come to your website where you can very smartly lay out a case from top to bottom of all the right information that a person needs to know to be convinced. You can't really do that on social media, can you? I mean, not as well.
Yes, gosh, Wes is just so good. And by the way, that was episode 137 with Wes McDowell. He's been on a couple times. Make sure if you haven't already, go back to episode 137, listen to that interview. The difference between social media and websites, Wes is just full of gold. He's awesome. All right, number 3 here. This is episode 124 with somebody who is a legit web design agency owner. This is Stefanyk. She's the CEO of Canopy Studios. That's Canopy with a K. If you are interested in building a legitimate web design agency that might specialize in other areas as well with digital marketing and e-commerce and stuff like that, check this episode out first off and check Canopy Studios out as well, because Anne is incredible. Now, the reason I wanted to feature this and the reason it really stuck with me is because she talked about what she likes to call the 3 C's of marketing, which basically stands for this: connect, converse, convert. Meaning a lot of people want to just get traffic and get in front of somebody and then make the sale and then go right into converting. But what a lot of people neglect is that very important middle C, converse. In this little clip here, Anne's going to talk about how they converse in both LinkedIn and other avenues in their marketing to help a lead become a hot lead who is going to be much quicker at converting later on. So check this out.
Okay, so we'll take it like actually 10,000 feet up and talk about when you're working with a prospect, you have to essentially connect with them, then you need to converse with them, and then you convert them. You can't go from connect to convert. There's this in-between part that's really important. So you'll probably, if you're on LinkedIn, like I get, 10 requests a day that are like, buy my services. Here we have this. We have developers, people over there. We can do UX. And I'm like, I can buy from you. I want to talk to you. So if you're going to use LinkedIn for networking, the most important part is to remember, where does LinkedIn fit into your flow of how you connect with a lead, right? So there's certain amount of work that you'll do to fill your funnel, which is all of your lead generation type work. And then you'll have, when they go into your pipeline, how you work them through your sales funnel. And then when they pop out, it's not just like the end of the road. Then you want to talk about client services and how to retain a client, how to keep a client for the long term. So there's kind of like 3 parts to a sales thinking in terms of revenue. Like, how do we get the leads? How do we nurture the leads? And how do we convert and keep the leads? So if we're in that, where LinkedIn falls into play, it falls into a play in a bunch of different places in there. Right? It falls into play that if you do end up one of the ways that we've strongly used LinkedIn is that if we were going to an event, right, what we will do is we'll try to get a list of who's coming to the event. So for a sponsor, if we think about it, if there's a list of 2,000 people and we're a sponsor, and let's say it's $2,000 to sponsor, and then we get that list, right? That's $1 per lead. How many of those are going to be qualified? Based on our experience going to events, maybe 10% of them are even want to buy a website sometime in their life, right? Whenever that is. So that's 200. So then out of that, how many are going to buy from us, right? And we can kind of do some numbers and crunch to see if it's a valuable investment. And if we can get that list and hone down and then filter it by all the director of marketers, then what we'll do is we'll do a casual reach out on LinkedIn that's like, hey, I both see we're going to this event. I'm really excited to meet you there. We connect here in the meantime. No ask, no sale, no blah, 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 blah. Ultimately, you could also see if you have common connections. You can say, hey, it looks like we have a common connection. I see you're also going to this event. Hope to see you there. Okay. So what happens is you pop into their LinkedIn and they're like, oh, who is this person? But then they're at the event and then you meet them and they're like, oh, you're right. And then when you're at the event, they can be like, oh, nice to meet you. Let me get your email. Let's set up a time to chat. Right. And then you have another channel. Like LinkedIn is another form of communication that business people are willing to communicate with you, but they won't just give you information. So if you jump into a group and you're like, oh, all these people have the same interests, I'm going to start messaging them all. You're probably going to get very little response. Right? It's more about how do you, if you do go to a Chamber of Commerce networking thing, find them all on LinkedIn and connect with them all on LinkedIn right there and say, hey, it was lovely to meet you, right? All you have to say is like a connection. Because again, all you're doing connecting. And then the conversing part is you're going to post stuff that hopefully you've chosen the right director of marketing to connect with. They might not need a website today, but in 2 years they do. And all of a sudden you post something about accessibility of forms for, making sure your website forms are accessible or whatever. And they're like, oh, that's interesting. That person I met there.
And is Ann awesome? Or what? I love that episode. That's 124. Highly recommend checking that out as we talk about more sales strategies in all sorts of avenues, both in person and online, like LinkedIn, social media, networking groups, etc. So check that out. Now, number 4, this is a personal favorite for me on the podcast. This is episode 104 with the voice, the radio broadcaster, the voice of the Columbus Blue Jackets, my favorite hockey team. I'm in Columbus, Ohio, so as a hockey guy, I'm big into the Blue Jackets, and I've been listening to Bob McElligott, who is, again, the broadcaster, the radio broadcaster for the Jackets for years, and he has a podcast called CBJ and 30 where I've actually been on it asking questions, and he answers them. But what's really cool about this episode is I know that Bob has just really talked about how to get better at communication and on camera. He actually talked about that when he started asking for questions, video questions, to be on the podcast. And I just reached out to him. I emailed Bob and I said, hey, would you be interested in coming on my podcast? Even though he doesn't know anything about web design, but just to talk about getting better on camera and communication. And that's exactly what he did. This was personally one of my favorite episodes. And if you are terrified at getting on camera, do not miss this episode. It really is full of gold from start to finish. This is episode 104 with Bob McElligott. Check it out. That's the way you have to look at it, is somebody, whoever you're talking to, envision them. And I wanted to ask you too about that between talking to one person and talking to a group, because when you do the play-by-play, your audience, I don't know what the numbers are, but your audience is to, thousands and thousands of people. Whereas when you do CBJ and 30, it's a different approach to communication. How do you do that? Do you kind of envision who you're talking to as to whether it's going to be a broad audience versus a smaller group versus, a more intimate talk? Like, how do you communicate that way? And how do you change the way you talk with different audiences?
No, I don't think so. I think when I do a game, I'm trying to do it as though I'm just doing it for you. And the same with a podcast or whatever. I always, in my mind, I'm just talking, right? Yeah. But I'm talking like I'm talking to one person. And I want to follow up on one thing that you said too, about looking at the camera. Case in point, like right now I'm doing this on a tablet and I know where the camera is on this tablet. Okay. So when you're out there and you're doing your video, if you don't have a separate camera, if you're just using the camera on the device that you're using, know where that camera is and look at that camera. Because I'll tell you, like, Josh, as you're talking to me and I'm looking at the camera, I see you in my peripheral vision, right? I'm not looking directly at the screen and watching you as you talk. If I do that, my eyes are going to go down and be looking somewhere else. So whether you're in a conference with people or whether somebody's just watching back a presentation, if I'm looking into the camera, I'm looking at you no matter what. Okay. I'm not distracted. And it's very easy because like I can see every movement that you're making, but I'm not focused on you specifically. It's very distracting. You've got to mentally override what the heck you're doing so that you're not looking down. But just think about it. Think about when you go back, when somebody goes back and watches it, do you want them looking at you, especially if you're to the point you're trying to sell something? You want to be looking into their eyes as you're trying to sell it? Or do you want to be, off somewhere else looking at something else? And am I going to trust you to buy that thing if you can't even look me in the eye when you're talking to me about it? And you're not even doing it on purpose. This is all just getting used to the surroundings. Like you said, I mean, this is still, it's been going on for 10 months, but it's still relatively new to many people. So that's just one of the little tips. It's distracting. It's frustrating. You want to look at the other person. You want to see their facial expression and all of that. But you know what? The end product, when you go back and you play it back later and you watch it back later, it's going to look so much better to you, and it's going to look so much better to your clients if you're looking right into that camera.
So again, that's just a little clip, a little dose of awesomeness that literally that conversation, like some podcast episodes might take a little bit to warm up till we get to the good stuff. Bob McElligott from start to finish, awesome. That episode I can't recommend enough checking out from start to finish. Again, especially if you're just terrified of getting on camera like I was, and you want to get better. You want to be able to sell better. You want to be able to do Loom videos. You want to do presentations. You want to do Zoom calls and not turn on the camera and go like this. It's awesome through and through. That's episode 104 with Bob McElligott. Now, number 5, this is episode 153 with one of my close colleagues and awesome web design students, Lisa Breedt, about the really important, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it, the really important tactic now of authentic branding and not looking so overpolished and not trying to be too perfect. This conversation was incredible all the way through. It was fairly recent, so some of you maybe remember this. It might be fresh on your mind. That's episode 153 about authentic branding and how businesses now more than ever want somebody who is real. They don't want an overpolished look. I could do this video in a studio with a bunch of lighting and wild cameras and a perfect background. I'm just my home office. And you don't need this big mic. You don't need these big lights. You don't need anything like that. Gear is not the issue now. You can have a simple webcam, and as long as your lighting is halfway decent, that is enough to do videos on your website and do videos for your clients. And in this episode, and in this clip, you'll hear about how important it is to just be real and to be authentic and be you and don't hide behind your brand. In this little clip, Lisa is going to explain why the days of being too professional and too overpolished are over and businesses change now. So check this out. I think it'll inspire you just like it inspired me.
Striving for perfection or wanting things to be perfect or wanting things to be overly produced and polished. And this comes back to brand authenticity. The days of being overly produced, polished, so like perfect that people can't relate to you are over. People see that because if a lot of this happened with the arrival of social media, where a lot of people were like overly produced and really like using so many filters that they don't even look like they really do in person. Now, that's fine. You can do that. But guess what? The minute you have to meet a person in person and you do not look like the representation you had online, just there you have lost all their trust. You've broken the trust. Because you have just built up this persona, you've built up this energy and this vibe of who you are, but it's not really you because you are trying to be like others. You put in too many filters. You actually hiding who you are behind all of that, and it's not really who you are. When you show up in person, face to face, or on a Zoom meeting, it will show immediately, and there goes your trust. So my advice here is, just be you. Be who you are. Make the little mistakes. We are human. No human is like a robot and we don't make mistakes. I mean, this was our third take. It happens, but just flow with the mistakes. Now, look, if it's a really bad mistake, edit it out. But don't strive for that perfection and then you never get out the blocks.
So again, episode 153, Lisa Breedt. I Gosh, I love that episode all the way through. Highly, highly recommend you check that out. Now, number 6, 142. This is with the author of the book, Think Red Flags. This is Walter Hill. It was interesting because his proposal came through. I often get emails from people with guest ideas for the show. And I saw this guy, Walter Hill, and I saw the book title, and I thought, okay, that's interesting. What was more interesting about Walter, though, is how seasoned of an entrepreneur he is. He has been an entrepreneur and in the business world for decades, and he has just such an incredible outlook on business and life and how to spot dangers in your business and how to spot threats and red flags so that you can avoid them. Or if you do run into mistakes, they're not catastrophic. And in this little clip you're going to hear from Walter, you're going to hear about a little situation that he had with his daughter, who basically told him, I need to make mistakes to get through life. And his big thing is you don't want to have catastrophic mistakes that are going to derail you completely. And in business, this is really, really important. So I thoroughly enjoyed this talk with Walter Hill. He was such a pleasure to have on. It was an honor to have him on the podcast. Seasoned Entrepreneur, episode 142. Make sure you listen to the full episode if you haven't already, and check out this little clip from Walter.
Well, you've just given one of the best examples of red flagging. People ask, what is it? That's an excellent example of what it is and what it does. It wasn't an object that you had to do anything with. It was your mindset. It was your thought process that said, well, what if? But these things can prevent problems that can be catastrophic. And that's the whole idea. I remember when my 16-year-old daughter, when she was 16 at the time, she said to me, and I was doing one of my dad coaching things, which you will certainly realize as you go along with your kids.
Yeah, they're 3 and 1 right now, so I'm not doing too much coaching yet. But
yeah, it's a little early for that now. But she said, I was explaining something to her, and she says, well, Dad, I know you don't want me and my sister to make mistakes. She said, but we're going to have to make our own mistakes as we grow up. And I said, you're absolutely right. I said, but sweetheart, as your father, my job is not to keep you from making mistakes, but to keep you from making mistakes from which you cannot recover.
Gotcha.
Okay? That's my job. And the same thing applies to our business life. We have to just identify and avoid those mistakes that could be catastrophic. If I'm a small business and I have a shipment of goods coming in from China and 2 or 3 containers, and it's $200,000 or $300,000, and I'm a small business, and open the container and the goods are not what I expected, it's close to time to close the doors. I mean, you can, unless you have the reserves to take a $200,000 or $300,000 hit, and you're a small business, which most small businesses don't. Then it has a major impact. So what we're trying to do is not overdo, but really identify the things that can have a major negative impact on your business and control those.
That's awesome.
The smaller low impact things will, they come and they go, you learn from them and you move forward from them. You don't have to put as much focus on that.
Gosh, it's awesome. Are these guests awesome? And again, these are just 10 moments out of hundreds throughout the year that I had. So gosh, thank you, guests. Anyone who's watching this, who's been on the podcast, thank you for coming on. I wish I could feature 1,000, but that's going to be a long video. So we're going to stick with 10. Now, number 7, this is episode 115 with one of my favorite new entrepreneurs, Ellen Yin. She basically teaches people how to go from cubicle to CEO. I'm all about that because that ain't my style. Probably know my thoughts on the corporate world and stuff like that. Well, Ellen was such a great guest. She's so savvy, so smart. And what's funny is actually I have a student who is one of her students as well. And this student, April, shout out to April, she was like, you should talk to my business coach, Ellen, and you would love her. And then I was like, will you get me in touch with her? I'd love to have her on the podcast. And I did. And what was interesting about this clip that you'll hear is Ellen really talks about whether everyone is cut out to be an entrepreneur, because this is something I was curious about. It's like, should everyone be an entrepreneur? And you'll find out in this clip what her thoughts are on that to see if maybe this is right for you. Likely, if you're listening to this podcast, it's going to be right for you, but come to find out, it may not be for everyone. Check this out.
Do I think anyone can make money online from an existing skill or, whatever it is. Yes. I do think everyone is capable of doing that. Do I think everyone should be an entrepreneur? No. and I really think that, like you mentioned, Josh, entrepreneurship takes a very unique, mindset. Yes, but it takes this desire to truly forge your own path and create something in spite of every bad thing that could be thrown at you, because it's tough. It's people love to glamorize, like, oh, you work for yourself and you get to be in your PJs and you can make an unlimited income. And, they shout all these things from the rooftops. And while those things may be true for some people, I think people don't often talk about, like, there's a lot of hard stuff that comes your way when you're an entrepreneur, and you have to want the journey bad enough that you're willing to go through it, because people often just see the end vision. They're like, oh, well, if I could just, make a 6-figure income or 7-figure income as an entrepreneur, then that'd be amazing. But the thing is, like, 99% of your time is not spent at the end post, right? It's the journey. So if you don't actually love the journey, I don't think you're going to love being an entrepreneur. And
it's a great thought.
What I will say to that as well is, I think the world needs both. I don't think everyone's minds and spirits and hopes and dreams are desired to be like business owners. And I think that we as entrepreneurs could not be successful without great teams, if you choose to have a team. And so I think some people, like your dad, they thrive in being part of a mission that's bigger than themselves, and working together with their peers and using their skills for good and making an impact through their jobs and receiving that paycheck. And for them, the reward is there. It's fulfilling for them. And I think that sometimes too, maybe you've noticed this in the entrepreneurship world, people tend to shame the 9-to-5 world as if like it's something that's bad and should be avoided. But I think that's only true if it doesn't fulfill you, because it does fulfill some people. And so I think, to answer your question in short, no, I don't think everyone should be an entrepreneur.
So again, Ellen Yin, episode 115. That one is another one that is gold through and through. She was just awesome. I'm already excited to have her back on the podcast. So Ellen, if you're listening to this, hit me up because I want to have you back on. All right, now to number 8. This is episode 101. Speaking of business coaches, with my personal business coach. This is James Schramko, who I've been with since the fall of 2018. Right when I started doing courses, I signed up with James Coaching, and I've been in his community and his coaching ever since. Still with him today. James is awesome. The reason I love James is he is a very counterintuitive entrepreneur. He is not a big hustle kind of guy. He is a lifestyle, work-life balance type of guy. Really resonated with me. And his book is how I got involved with him. And the book is called Work Less, Make More. So he is the author of that book. I highly recommend, number one, checking that book out. Again, Work Less, Make More by James Schramko. And in this little clip you're about to hear, first of all, it was an honor to have him on the podcast. And that one, again, another episode with gold just through and through. I feel like every time I asked him a question, he gave me a snippet I could use across different platforms. But in this episode, and in this clip in particular, I think you're going to be challenged, especially if you're somebody who is interested in hiring out. If you are to the point where you're just slammed and you're thinking about scaling, but you don't want a big agency like I didn't want, you're nervous about hiring, you like controlling things, you're your contact for your clients, this episode will help give you some inspiration, encouragement to do it, because whether you realize it or not, you've actually already hired out. So you have the skill. Check this little clip out and see if this gives you some more inspiration to do so. But I want to ask you, so if somebody's listening to this and they're getting inspired, they're writing tasks down, they want to figure out what they can cut out or delegate. But here comes the pivotal point. It's like, just like I did, I got nervous about paying somebody to do something, whether it was a pride thing, whether it was an OCD thing, just wanting to have all the control, or whether I was just nervous that it's just weird to pay somebody. And then it's like, well, I could do that. Why pay somebody? What would you say to somebody that's stuck in that salary or maybe freelancer mindset that's afraid to delegate, but that's the next step they need to do?
Well, have they ever eaten in a restaurant?
I'm guessing so.
Then they've already done it. You already have the skill. You just probably don't know it. You have the skill to pay someone to go and to grow the food, prepare it, like transport it, prepare it, cook it, serve it up on a plate for you to eat. And then when you leave, they wash up. And if you don't feel bad about that, then why would you feel bad about providing employment opportunities for people? Like putting money back out in the world. If you want to be, more of a contributor, employ people, feed the economy. Like I love sending money over to my team. I know they're growing families, they're consuming, they're putting money back into the marketplace, and it's creating a goodwill. So I think it's okay to hire people. I think you can do more. You've got a little more power to help more people if you can grow. And I'd say the number one thing that's holding a small business back from being a bigger business is they're not spending enough. And if you switch the word spending to investing, then it probably starts to make sense. Because at the end of the day, what matters is come tax time, how much is left in your account. So all your revenue comes in, all your expenses go out. How much is left in your account? So you could be the web developer who does everything yourself, and you bring in $100,000 and you spend out $10,000 and you keep $90,000. Or you could hire a team to do everything. You could bring in $1 million in the year. You could spend out even $400,000 or $500,000 to everyone else and all the other things, and be left with $500,000 in your account. And you actually didn't even have to do that much because everyone else did it for you.
So there you go. Is James, he's just awesome. He is awesome. I'm so glad he's my coach. I highly recommend you check out the whole episode 101 with James Schramko. You'll get that type of encouragement and challenging type of, motivation along with everything else. So it really was an awesome episode. So thank you, James, for coming on. Now let's move to the last couple. This is number 9 with one of my very favorite colleagues in the WordPress realm. This is McElligott, episode 151. This is the second time she was on the podcast. And in this episode, we talk about, setting client boundaries, a huge issue for all entrepreneurs, but definitely for web designers when it comes to them knowing the boundaries. Should I text you? Should I call you? When should I call you? How should I email you? Should I even email you? Do we use Asana or Basecamp? We talk all about setting those client boundaries. And before you check out this little clip that Emma shares, just remember, it is up to you. If your client is texting you at all hours of the night and they're calling you and they're doing things that are not ideal for you, you're probably quick to want to blame them. But the reality is, it's probably your fault because you didn't set those boundaries. So this episode 151, teaches you in depth how to set client boundaries. Check out this little clip from Emma on how she felt more power to set those boundaries early on.
Yeah, I think so much of it is almost giving yourself permission, to set those boundaries. I think that's the thing. It took me a while to realize, hey, no, I'm the boss here. I can do what I want. And if it doesn't suit a client too, I was at that point where it's that's okay. I'm just not the designer for them. I can recommend someone else who likes to chat on the phone or whatever it might be. So I think, and I notice this with students a lot, it's really all I'm kind of doing when I'm telling students is I'm giving them permission. I'm telling them they can do whatever they really want to do in a way. And design their business around that. And one of the things I think that probably pushed me over the edge is that so many of my designer friends, I'm yet to have children, but so many of my designer friends had children. And so they had to start setting these clear boundaries of this is when I work, or I work at all these random hours, but you can expect to hear from me within 24 hours or whatever it might have been. And no one questions that, of course. If you're a mum or you're a dad, people know you've got other priorities and people work around that. So I kind of thought, well, what's stopping me doing that? Really, I can design my life around that. And really, I need to sort of put that in place for when I do have children. I need to have these clear boundaries anyway. So
there you go. Just a little clip. Little tip there on how to set client boundaries. Check out episode 151 for the full episode with my great and awesome colleague, McElligott from Down Under. Check that out for sure. All right, now the final top 10 moment, again, for me personally, of many. I had hundreds of moments, thousands of moments. So if you've been on the podcast and as a guest and you didn't make, you're not on the list, just know it was a struggle. I wanted to put so many more moments in here, but I did decide to limit to the top 10. Now, my top moment personally of the year came from having world-class entrepreneur Pat Flynn on the podcast. He was able to come on for episode 100, which was an honor. I really have two main mentors right now. It is James Schramko, my business coach, who you just heard from, and it's Pat Flynn by way of his courses and his membership and a lot of his material. So when I was on his podcast for the Smart Passive Income Show, I just asked him, I said, Pat, would you be interested in coming on to the show? And he agreed to be our featured guest for episode 100. And he just dished out value bombs every segment. Same thing. Every time I asked a question, it was like a snippet I could put somewhere. And in this particular little clip, he dishes out a quote that has resonated with me ever since. And he dishes out quite a few things in this little snippet you're about to hear, but I'll just tell you right now, actually, no, listen to it. And I want to see if you can guess which quote stood out to me and impacted me that I think is going to impact you. Check it out.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing I often do is flip that mindset, right? Because when people go, well, this is risky. Like, there's some negative things that can happen here, right? That's often where we go first, right? Which is great. That's our biological security system, if you will. And that's important because we can reduce the risk, which keep us safe. But I often flip the script really quick and I go, well, what's the risk of not doing this, right? I want people to think about what happens if they continue on the same path. And if we take a little trip in the DeLorean in the future and we consider ourselves from this point forward, we have two choices. We go this way or this way. Let's travel into the DeLorean into both scenarios into the future and see how we feel after each of these and what we perhaps either feel like we missed out on or we might regret. For me, I often like to live by this phrase, and that's I'd much rather live a life full of oh wells than a life full of what ifs.
Oh,
right?
that's good.
So that's important to me, right? I want to see if it works, and if it doesn't, at least I know it doesn't. Versus when I'm older, sitting in my grandpa chair or whatever, thinking, wow, what if I had done that? And just like that eating me all day, eating my brain all day. I don't know. So that's kind of where I often have my students start when we start thinking about this. Like, let's flip it to potentially the positive. What could actually happen if you do this? So that's number one.
Oh,
now, there is risk. Obviously, you might have a family. You might have some other things going on. Often we, as I've already demonstrated, we often think about the worst case scenarios, right? So if we step back from the situation, we go, well, what is actually the worst thing that can happen if I were to give this a shot?
Yeah.
A lot of times it's not even close to what it might be, right? You might find that, well, actually you could just go get another job back to the thing that you were doing before. If that's in fact something that, didn't work out on this new path, you can go back. Like I could have gone back to architecture eventually and have no problem, right? If the business thing didn't work. And I didn't even think about that. I was just like, my life is over. Yeah. What am I going to do? I'm going to end up naked in a ditch somewhere soon. Right. Like, just like our brains are crazy like that. At the same time, even on that front, no, because I have some friends and family who, if I were really, really struggling, they would help me and they would support me. And I have advocates in my life. And so that's really key too. So honestly, there's a lot of things working in my favor to take this risk. Now, obviously, if money is an issue, then you could potentially build a little bit of a bankroll first, just to kind of keep yourself above water in case things take a little bit more time than expected. And many people want a little bit of a safety net as well. Mm-hmm. And that can help reduce the risk too. I think also realizing that there are people out there who are likely doing the things that you are hoping to do, and they've done them already and have already gone through a lot of the mistakes and could shave hours, days, weeks, years off. Yeah.
Decades.
Years off
maybe.
Your learning process.
Yeah.
Right. So this is why when I'm trying something new, I often go, okay, who's done this already? Right. I'm like looking around and I try to find somebody. This is all parts of my life. From the time I committed to running a triathlon, I found a person who knew how to do it, hired them to help train me. And the part of that was interesting because he had a business too. And I was able to get a good deal because I was able to kind of pro bono a lot of that too, which was pretty cool. When I'm learning a new platform, okay, who are the big players on this platform right now? And what are they doing well that's working? And who's teaching about this stuff? So that I don't have to go and fumble like I did in the beginning. I can just go to a person who's done it before me, and that reduces the risk too. Because part of the risk is taking too long to figure things out. Now, you will stumble, you will make mistakes, but if you can cut that in half or by 3/4 because somebody else has already gone down that path first, oh, hey, then it might even be worth investing into that, or at least investing time into doing the research.
Yeah.
So that's important too. And then the big thing that I often recommend for people starting out who feel like this is a big risk is, also remember that it's not always just a binary choice. Like, I have to go all in on this or all in on this. You can actually slow roll your way into it, right? Like a lot of people, I'm sure many of your students also continue to have a 9-to-5 job while doing the web design stuff on the side. And that's great too. There's a great book by Chip and Dan Heath called Decisive that really unpacks this idea that we as humans, we just think A or B, or yin and yang, or, there's only two sides to the coin. But there's often, in the decisions that we make moving forward, a whole spectrum of things that can happen in between. And it's important to consider those options too. And there's likely a less risky option in the middle somewhere for you.
And here's the quote. If you didn't guess it, I know there's a couple in there. I'd rather live a life full of oh wells than what ifs. That, my friends, is definitely a top moment for me from the podcast last year. I hope that resonates with you as well, particularly those of you who are thinking about going full-time. Those of you who are maybe side hustling web design right now, and you're leery of taking the risk. And I understand it's a big deal, especially for those of you who have mortgages and responsibilities and families. It is a big deal. It needs to be planned out. But I'm telling you right now, that quote, I'd rather live a life full of oh wells than what ifs, I back that up 100%. When he said that, I got chills. I still get chills thinking about that, because I think about some of the top moments of my life of when I did something big and when I took the risk. And that quote really sums up how I felt and how I feel now, because I'm already still at that point where I'm still taking big risks. And I have that quote in the back of my mind. Maybe I'll put it up on the wall. Maybe I'll put it up on the wall here somewhere. I'd rather live a life full of what ifs than let's rewind. I'd rather live a life full of oh wells than what ifs. So there you go, guys. Those are my top 10 moments. That was episode 100 with Pat Flynn. Definitely check all these episodes out and more if you haven't already from last year on the podcast. Thank you for watching. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast. This one's interesting because we're actually doing video and audio. If you're new to the podcast, all of my interviews do go up on YouTube. My solo episodes are generally just audio, so this will just be on wherever you listen to the Josh Hall Web Design Show on podcasts. But make sure, if you would, please subscribe and definitely leave a review, particularly for those of you listening on Apple or Spotify. I know Spotify now you can do reviews. You can actually go to joshhall.co/podcast review, one word, and then I'll give you some links to be able to easily do some reviews. So it would really mean the world to me to get a rating and review. I do read all the reviews, so if you would do that, that would be amazing. And last note, just remember, my awesome VA Cam outlines timestamps and fully transcribes every one of these podcast episodes. So when you go to episode 100, for example, of Pat Flynn, you'll get a full transcription, timestamps with the outline of the episode, links, and everything we discussed. So just remember, every episode, if it's like episode 114, it'll be joshhall.co/114. You can go there for all the outline and all the goods and all transcriptions, particularly for those of you who don't speak English as a first language. God forbid you're learning English through my podcast. I'm sorry about the words that you're going to have in your vocabulary, because I tend to mix words together and make up words, but you can get the full transcriptions there. So anywho, those are the top 10 moments from the podcast in 2021. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this. And again, last reminder, take some time to do this for you as well. Reflect on last year. Think about your wins, your accomplishments. You did way more than you realize that you already did. So I want you to take some time right now. I'm going to give you some coaching motivation. Reflect on the year. If you've already planned out 2022, awesome. If you haven't yet, plan out your big goals, plan out your quarterly tasks and what you want to get done, and then reflect, because you did awesome. You did awesome last year. Keep that momentum going. All right. See you on the next episode. Hey guys and gals, just wanted to pop in with a couple things before you head out. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to this podcast. I would love to hear your feedback, and it will also help other web designers find the show. Be sure to check out the show notes for this episode. Just go to joshhall.co, click on podcasts, and search this episode number, and you'll find all the links, descriptions, and resources we talked about. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, and you'll be notified when the next episode is live. Thanks again for tuning in, and I'll catch you guys on the next episode.